This program is designed to provide general information with regards to the subject matters covered. This information is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, sponsors, or station are engaged in rendering any specific and personal, medical, financial, legal, counseling, professional service, or any advice. You should seek the services of competent professionals before applying or trying any suggested ideas.
Good morning, true seekers and true crime junkies. Welcome back to another episode of Hit the Road, Jack, Finding the Zodiac. We are back into the handwriting examination today. I have just a few pieces of information from commenters that I'd like to cover. I've been doing some research on some of the communication, so we'll cover a little bit of that. We did have someone named Linwood Weber who posted on the Zodiac Killer, The Untold Story by Dennis Kaufman. He indicated that, and he's actually responding to someone named Douglas Spence, and I'm assuming that Douglas must have indicated that Arthur Lee Allen was again the suspect, or the best suspect for the Zodiac killings. Linwood said, DNA, fingerprints, and handwriting samples prove Arthur Lee Allen wasn't the Zodiac, and Brian Hartnell described the suit Zodiac was wearing was made of good quality, like it came from a costume shop. It wasn't made from a cheap-ass sack like that, he says. And that kind of gave me a tickle, because while he's there correcting someone else who has their belief, he obviously has his belief. I did shoot back a quick message and responded about the eye holes that were cut out, so clearly that wasn't a costume made from a costume shop if the killer had to actually cut out his own eye holes. Anyways, I was looking back and trying to source some of the communications just to make sure that what we have in the presentation is worthy of being compared to the Zodiac Killer's handwriting, because the whole goal here is to try and identify other crime sprees, other serial killing sprees that this perpetrator might have taken part in based on the handwriting. And I did come across something called the trailer writing, and I'm really still trying to source it. I know that one of them was written by Arthur Lee Allen while he was in custody, and that's this one over here to the right. Let's get that up. Yeah. So we do have them attempting to have other suspects write this particular message. I believe it came from the Herb Cain letter. So interesting that they felt that that letter was possibly a forgery, yet they're really working on suspects to have them write that message out, which really kind of makes for a lot of confusion, I suggest. We do have this one down here. I am not sure if this came from a suspect, if this was something that was left behind, or what it was that Arthur Lee Allen was purportedly attempting to give a handwriting sample for. Of course, we can see up here they have it typed out so that he isn't looking at the actual sample that they're wanting him to write like, and then that allows him to go about it on his own basis and write as he should. What I did notice, though, and I'm guessing this has to be somewhere around the 1970s, but I did see that there was actually some forms that we saw later in other communications that we're going to be talking about. And that's what really kind of piqued my interest, because if that information had been made available, say that Jack was the person I think that he possibly is and has the inside information, was he privy to this particular writing by Arthur Lee Allen, and did he attempt to mimic it at a later date? And I'll show you why that is later on down the road. So figuring out where this particular writing came from, they call it trailer writing, and I'm not sure why. I kind of was under the impression that possibly there had been maybe some filming going on and it was left inside of a trailer. I don't know. I'm really just trying to source it at this point. So moving on from that, I did find some additional information. I actually found a Department of Justice letter where Sherwood Morrill excluded Arthur Lee Allen based on his handwriting. I'm not sure if they or how they determined that his handwriting was natural. I mean, I wouldn't have asked for a suspect to write something so much as I would have collected exemplars or previous writings previous to the actual document in question to get something a little more natural. But it looks like having them write the actual message gave them some clues, possibly to line up, spacing, things of that nature. But somebody could certainly manipulate their handwriting and attempt to disguise their handwriting while giving an actual sample. I have been in contact also with Bruce Smith in the DB Cooper case. I've been trying to determine which, if any, of the communications that are in this presentation are anything that has been attributed to the DB Cooper case. And he does not believe that there's any written communication from DB Cooper in evidence. He said nada. As for speech patterns, slang, etc., he takes Tina's word on that. He says, the suspect had mentioned, let's get the show on the road. That's definitely sounding like something that the Zodiac or Jack would say. And no funny stuff or I'll do the job. Now, I find that one interesting, or I'll do the job. That particular linguistics really sounds something like the Zodiac would say, or even maybe something mob related, I'll do the job. Almost as if that, I mean, when he calls it the job, it's as if he is being elicited to do this particular hijacking. So I want to pay attention to a little bit of that, and I'm going to dig more into it as I speak with Bruce Smith and maybe other statements that the suspect had made. We left off at the capital letter D last week, so we're going to go full screen on the presentation. Going to take me off screen. Make that bad boy big. Thank you. So basically, I think we had made it up here to about the second row. We had started talking about some of the consistencies with the letter D. One of those was that stem that sticks down like we saw on the B's. We also see that happening in the D's. And so for some purposes in handwriting, there are certain attributes and characteristics we can cross-reference even if it's not exactly the same letter, especially if we see that they continually do that particular characteristic, like that stem that's sticking down. And then we can start pointing that out, obviously, in the question documents to show that that characteristic is definitely something that was in Jack's arsenal. We also talked about the overhang at the very top. Sometimes it's minuscule, sometimes it's quite large, and how that compares to other writings that were done in these sprees. This particular one was done in lipstick. Of course, I do tell people that long arm action is very similar to, or the images are going to lay out pretty much the same as if somebody was writing with a pencil. Even if you were, keying a car or writing on a chalkboard, long arm, your brain is still in control of the master pattern. As we got into the Oswald letters, we could see some of those similarities in the shapes of the D's that were being formed, and some of these more angular or square style D's that we saw that Jack was making. In fact, that one's pretty much fairly dead on. We have a flattened bottom, we have more of a flattened front side, and we have a flattened top side, which is consistent up there. As we carry on over into Sherry Jo Bates, we see that same type of form once again, that more of a square D, and then down into what I refer to as the thin D, and that's where it actually thins out at the bottom portion here that we can see is definitely something within Jack's arsenal as well. And also we started to see that stem that was dropped once again, just like we saw back in Elizabeth's short. And of course, the D with the small overhang at the top and the thinner bottom. Again, characteristics that are holding consistent. In the Dear Draft Board letter, we saw what was even more of a thinner D. And of course, as I passed through and looked, I started to see those in other communications. So to me, it really just sparks my interest in the degree of the person's thought process about what they consider to be disguised or manipulated handwriting. And we're seeing that those similarities are kind of playing out. In the Zodiac Killer, we once again saw that stem that poked down on the bottom left side. And then, of course, these are more copybook, but when you compare the copybook to what looks more like copybook from Elizabeth Short, we can see that there are consistencies there, trying to make it as perfect as possible. But then we start to see it fall right back into these Ds with these very, very thin bottoms. Once again, we see this almost rounded section that occurs at the bottom of Jack's D's, and we saw that occur here with that little overhang at the top left. Again, this one was very, very similar to what we've seen happening up here in Jack's handwriting. And then on down the line, we get into more of these thinner D's again. So the consistency and the range of characteristics, while the individual has gone from something as a fat, wide copybook D into a more thin D, we still see that the characteristics are kind of falling in line there. Oh, I forgot to remove this. So basically, one of the communications that I have kicked from this, it only had 7 letters on it, and it was the airplane ticket from Dan Cooper. I thought I got all of these pieces out. So after speaking with Bruce Smith, we had discussed the fact that the airplane ticket was likely written by the flight attendant, not by the suspect. And after I reviewed the color version of this particular ticket, I found that all the writing on this ticket was done in a red ink. That would be consistent with a single author who had not only written in the name of the person who was flying, but also had checked all the appropriate boxes for that flight. So I have ruled out that one as something I'm going to be continuing with in this communication. But like I said, again, it was only 7 letters. We really couldn't affect too much of an identification in that. But as I went through other letter Ds in the D.B. Cooper case, again, Bruce Smith does not, he says that the communications are controversial. So it's not that they're widely accepted that they came from D.B. Cooper. I guess the assertion could be that possibly somebody who wanted to take credit for it, albeit when you start to look at these communications in whole, which we'll get to in 1971, you'll start to see how the rhyme and rhythm works right into what the Zodiac was doing. So does that lead us back to a point where Zodiac was merely the author? That would then insinuate that he was involved in some type of a complicit conspiracy with others, because in order for him to have Paul Stein's shirt and to have written a letter including the shirt would mean that he would have to have close ties with the killers or the killers' camp. So you kind of got to take it in both directions. But right now we're just looking at the handwriting and seeing if we can make an identification of these authors. So when I got into D.B. Cooper, we did see again where the stem stuck out from the bottom and the D kind of ended up short here, which was extremely consistent with, again, Jack's D's. Now, of course, as you go through here, you see a wide range of variation, just like you did in the Zodiac Killer, which tells us that they're attempting to manipulate their handwriting or to disguise things. And we get back into some of these other thinner D's, once again, with the overhang that sticks out on the top side. Albany, New York. This one, again, we had the stem that stuck down at the bottom. We can see that the killer is attempting to manipulate his handwriting, again, with those more, trying to make the D's perfect. The SLA D is very consistent. This one here with the stem sticking out the bottom. Very consistent with the D.B. Cooper and, again, Jack's writing. When we got into the Channel 9 newsletter, we started to see a different form, but we do know that all of these letters with the stars have been attributed to the Zodiac Killer. So when we look at them, we can take all of these into perspective as a range or a disguise that the killer is attempting to use, and then cross compare those to these other letters in question. When we got into the Herb Cain, again, we saw that very thin D that we've been talking about that we saw up here in the Zodiac Killer's writing. So again, something extremely similar. The Atlanta, Georgia child killer obviously used a similar shape that we saw that was being used in the French murder, and that we know that is in Jack's arsenal as well. Let's see, the Sacramento D. Of course, some of these communications I would love to have better versions of. If anybody out there has better copies, let me know. I'd be happy to change these letters out and introduce those for a clearer version. But we do see that that D in the Sacramento letter is very consistent with the copybook Ds that we found in the Zodiac Killers. Now, in the JonBenet Ramsey case, we actually had more of that angular D that we started to see happening over in Channel 9. We do have the overhang just at the top on the left side. And then in the Vowinovich letter in 2001, again, we start to see that drop down of the stem on the letter D's. So while they attempted to do something more copybook, the copybook is very consistent with the Zodiac Killer's copybook. And then we have these D's, like I said, with the stems that are hanging down. The Anthrax Ds kind of took on the very thin notion that we saw occurring up inside of the Zodiac Killer's writing in the Elizabeth Short writing. These Ds are extremely consistent. Some of them are a little blurred out as I tried to enlarge them. They kind of pixelated. So you're really just getting kind of a roundabout or overall idea of what that image looked like. But then when you got into some of the other Ds, you started to see that more attempt at the copybook D. More of a perfect execution of it. In the Tom Voigt letters, we saw exactly the same thing again. So we had the stem, we have the overhang to the top left-hand side. Again, if I had to walk you back through that, we could see that in JonBenet Ramsey's note. We can see it in the Zodiac's writing. So again, a very consistent D along with the big swooping D that actually has overhangs to the left of the stem on both sides. Some of those Ds were actually thin and with the very thinner bottom. So again, all within range of Jack. I'm not disappointed by those ranges whatsoever. They all seem to fit nicely in. And then of course the finale letter to Tim Miller, we had some of the more square Ds that we talked about earlier on. Some more of the copybook Ds that are a little more perfect. This one is actually kind of in an opposite fashion of what we saw going in with JonBenet Ramsey, where the bowl was more pointed upward. This one tends to be pointed downward. So it is a bit different than some of the other letters that we had seen, but there are still some consistencies in there. Bruce Ivans, these Ds were extremely thin, but we do know that Jack's range is all the way down to something that doesn't, if it was set aside, it would not look like a letter D, nor would somebody assume that that was a letter D, the way that it was actually shaped. But we do know that his range is from huge and fat down to this very, very thin letter D. In the Oakland County child murders, again, we did find these stems that were sticking out the bottom. We found the more copybook style D that was present in the Zodiac Killer's writing. It looks like this is much more of a manipulated handwriting just because of the variances that occur as we go across. And that's going to take us into the lowercase Ds, which were some of the home run hits. I mean, you can see how many circles I have wrapped around all these different communications as we go through them. And that's simply because there were a lot of similarities between these communications and Jack's handwriting. So as we go through, some of the things I point out is actually the shape of the bowl of the D, the loop on the stem of the D, and the exit stroke that comes up. And we'll be talking about this exit stroke because it is consistent in a lot of Jack's handwriting. To the opened bowl of the D. So we see the curl as it starts in here and then it works its way out and then actually comes down to a stop. The leaned back, there is this very leaned forward or leaned rightward movement in the handwriting of Jack. And so as we go through, we're going to start seeing more of this openness on the D bowl. The leaned back notion. Again, there is that upstroke that's occurring on the exit. This one is more of a printed D versus this cursive style that we see here. And then we get into some very odd, strange forms of the D that Jack has. One of those is very reminiscent to what we see happening. In fact, I just saw this particular style D in the trailer writing we were just talking about. which makes me want to include it in the examination and see how it fares out with things like the Riverside Phantom, Dear Marco letter, or Jack's writing in as well. So as I started to go through the D's, I started to notice similarities between the actual communications that are occurring in different sprees, starting from Lipstick into Black Dahlia, the Kernwell werewolf killer. As we go back and forth again, the blue indicates there is a consistency with Jack's handwriting. The red indicates that there's a consistency between other communications in other killings. So just to kind of take note of the shapes that we were actually looking at, once again, the angular notion that occurs on the D in Black Dahlia is consistent with angular versions of the D that are found in Sherry Jo Bates, along with the actual shapes of the bowls that we're seeing. So this particular one here has a very, very similar stem stroke to what we saw in Jack's handwriting. It almost makes it appear as though the bowl is beneath the stem because the stem does not come back down or protrude. And that's exactly how this one appears to me up here. And we start to see that over and over again. So I saw it again in Sherry Jo Bates here with the looped D, but then the actual bowl is dropped down beneath the stem. Let's see if we can find some other ones there. Here's another one in the Zodiac's writing. Once again, we have a very angular stem that is redrawn, and the bowl again drops down beneath the stem. We saw it again in the DC Freeway Phantom writing. Again, another version of that very same D. And I figure, semi-similar. It does look like there's a little bit of the stem that comes out of the bottom here, but again, the bowl is much lower. And then we have that rightward slant that's occurring. Let's see. And I think that was it for that particular type of D. As we go through the Zodiac Ds, those are the ones that I found were most similar with Jack's handwriting, which included the open portion of the bowl that we saw here. And that one was consistent. Where do we find him? Up here at the top, where the bowl doesn't necessarily completely come back and touch back, but also that the stem, not only with the rightward slant, also has an angular tip at the top here. That's extremely consistent with what we were seeing happening in Jack's handwriting and that open bowl once again. I want to say that I found the open, well, and here is some of the D's that we saw in the trailer writing. So I knew that I was looking for those somewhere, but I want to say that mostly the Zodiac was the only one that used a looped stem on the D. But even as you get into these, I mean, look at this one right here in the Citizen letter and make that cross comparison to the one up here in Jack's handwriting. The shape and the slant of the bowl. Of course, this does not have the up kick, but I want to say that, yep, here we go. In the Zodiac, we saw where there was the uptick coming off of the exit stroke of the D. So everything that I was looking for or everything that I found, should I say, in the Zodiac's writing was consistent in the letter D's with Jack's handwriting. And then when we get down into more of these ones that have this open bowl again, we can see that is consistent with Jack as well. Cross-referencing some of these, let's see, what did I find? This one is the form, actually, the single stroke that looks like it starts at the top of the bowl and wraps itself up and ends in the air is what we had going on over here in Jack's handwriting. The D's that are found here, I found were consistent from the 1986 Sacramento letter. Were consistent with one of the D's in the Sherry Jo Bates with that very awkward, strange looking looped stem. And let's see here. I want to say that this was not one of the forms. So in the Vowinovich file, the particular way that this particular D was formed was not consistent with what we had seen in previous writings. But I found it interesting that and the time frame that it was being used, because remember, people's handwriting does change and it's based on the time frame in which it's written. But if you cross compare the D's that are in the Voinovich letter with the Tom Voigt D's, which are only within a year of each other, you find that that actual shape and form is consistent in the way that it is being drawn. And when I got over into the finale letter to Tim Miller, again, we have extremely controlled handwriting, where the individual is definitely attempting to manipulate as we go back and forth, and we see these different sizes of the bowls and the different shapes of the bowls. Kind of tells you that there's no fluid rhyme or rhythm to this writing, so the person was likely manipulating their handwriting. But when we look at some of those bowls, then we can go back and look at some of the other question documents and see that those bowls, those big fat bowls, and the styles of those bowls are consistent, not only with other letters like the Herb Cain letter, but as well with Jack's letters as well. I want to say, was he up here? Well, you can kind of go back and forth. Once again, we do see that these particular D's in many of these Zodiac writings are something that are consistent and found inside of Jack's handwriting as well. And that brings us to the letter E. In the letter E, I notated a few things for Jack. Some of them was this actual up stroke or upward slant of the lower crossbar of the E, along with the curvature that occurs in it. I also notated this thing that happens on the back end of the letter, which is this crisscross of the bottom crossbar. Noted that in most cases, Jack made this E with all 4 strokes, which is really time consuming. Most people will find an easier way of doing it. And I believe, nope, this one is still 4 strokes as well. Most people would do a single stroke maybe for the stem and the bottom, and then or maybe even one full stroke for the entire outside of the E, and then just cross the middle crossbar with a second stroke. But as we can see in Jack's handwriting, he is literally using 4 separate strokes each time he's doing it, and that's how we get these cross marks that are occurring. The cursive backwards 3E, not used by everybody, but definitely in Jack's arsenal, and we do get to see that occurring as well. So I went basically back and forth, and I started to look for whether or not the slant was consistent of the crossbars and the way the angularity of the bottom corner occurred. We did see that that was absolutely happening in Jack's handwriting. And of course, we started to see it more prevalent in the Elizabeth Short, because that's where he attempted to use all capital letters in order to create that disguise. But they are consistent as we go through. We do get to see these E's with these crossbars that are protruding through the left side of the stem once again. And we do actually see that in several of these as we go through them. We'll take a look. But when I got into the Zodiac E's, I found that they were just pretty much just dead on to what we were looking at in Elizabeth Short. Again, confirming that the possibility of these 2 authors being one and the same and having committed these crimes. We did see E's with the curved bottom bar. Of course, when we looked at the Fairfield letter, you can tell that these are completely manipulated. One looks nothing like the next. And in the DC Freeway Phantom, we started to see some of these ones with these curved bottom portions, which I want to say was more consistent with the Oakland County child murder cases. And some of the actual, look at this, is the D.B. Cooper E's. So again, similar in time frame, both in November, using pretty much the same construction of disguise for those letter E's. And we can see from D.B. Cooper these overhangs that are occurring, the crossbars that are crossing through the stems, they're oddly sticking up in all kinds of different places, which is basically what was occurring with Elizabeth Short and the Channel 9 newsletter. I mean, look at these guys. I know that obviously people can look at these and see that these are not normal written E's. When you get over here, of course, these are more consistent with what we were looking at. And as I went through Jack's handwriting handwriting and looked at some of them, we did see some of those curved corners that weren't quite as angular as what we were seeing in some of the other like Zodiac Killer E's and things of that nature. But even when we got into DB Cooper, again, we see some similarities between this curved E that we just looked at. Where did you go to? I'm sorry, in the DC Freeway Phantom. And then, of course, that style E that we were looking at that was in the Zodiac Killer, also in Jack's writing. And as we go down, the Riverside Phantom. Oh, that's why these ones look so funky. Yes, the Riverside Phantom writings were actually some very creative and stylized persona writings. But when we get back into Herb Cain, we are back into that more angular notion. Again, with the, now, of course, this one is leaning over on its side. But if you were to pull that back upright, this would actually jet upward. It looks like I did not correct for the baseline on that. So this probably should have been turned a little bit. When we get into the Atlanta, Georgia, we are back to seeing, again, these structured, more copybook style E's, but then it did get right back into these ones with these small curvatures on the bottom. So that leads us back into the Oakland County Child, the DC Freeway Phantom, and DB Cooper. In the Sacramento letter, we saw again. Now this, I mean, this protruding to the left-hand side of the stem is just something that Jack does with many of his letters. So I did see, of course, we saw that happened up here in one of them, but for the most part, it looked like in what I could find in his known samples, they did stop at the stem and not protrude through, with the exception of that particular letter E. One of the things that I did point out, aside from this crisscross thing that you see happening at the bottom of the E, we saw it in Tom Voigt's E's down here. We see where that crisscross kind of creates almost a pooling or a circular dot of ink, which is definitely consistent with what we were finding in Jack's stuff. But I also found this trailing stroke that occurs to the inside of the E off the top of the crossbar. And I did point that out in, let's see. Oh, there we go. I must have lost some of my E's or some of my pointers. My presentation tried to automatically save, and when I didn't save it, I think I lost some work there. But there should have been arrows here showing these dragging strokes coming in off of the crossbars of the E's. That is consistent with what we're seeing inside of Tom Voigt's as well. So those are some more minute. Oh, there it is down here at the bottom. This is Jack's E here. So we can see these trailing strokes that occur from the actual crossbar as he works his way back down to make the next crossbar itself, but definitely consistent. When I looked at the Bruce Ivans E, the only capital E in that was extremely similar. If we just removed this overhang from the left-hand side here, the shape of this particular E from the bottom portion on up is very, very similar to the Sacramento letter, which is also another disguised E. Also very consistent with the shape and placement of the crossbars in the Zodiac Killer's letter E. So as we go through and we look at these different disguises and we cross-reference them again, there's that DB Cooper with the rounded portion on the bottom, very consistent with the DC Freeway Phantom. The lowercase e, I noted for Jack, this one, it kind of reminds me of a little Pac-Man, but angular on the backside, like his letter C's, with this angular top portion in the E as it then swoops back around. I also notated these wide mouth, if you will, because they're not curved. They're more straight, like a trailing exit stroke from the E that does not curve back around like some of these other ones that we're looking at. Also, these E's that did not seem to complete themselves. So we just had a small hook at the bottom of the E. And when I looked into Lipstick Killing's E's, we are kind of seeing some of the same structure, same form, same shape. Let's see. want to say I did not mark any of these, or I lost them. Either way, we do see that this particular E in the Zodiac Killer's writing was consistent with the stopping short and with the stem that sticks out to the left-hand side. Once again, I did notate that in several of these letter E's. As far as the shape, consistency, and the stopping points were concerned, these ones that are completely laid out once again with this straight bar that is coming off of it, almost making it look like it's laying on its backside. Again, very consistent with Jack's. I believe that one right there in the Dear Draft Board letter was cross-referenced to this one up here in Jack's handwriting. But most notably is when you start to look at some of these shapes and forms of what the author believes he's disguising as, and then you go back and you look at other disguised writings, that's where you see the consistencies between some of these E's as well. Let's see if there's anything. Again, here's one that we found absolutely identical in the Zodiac Killer's writing with Jack's. We also found these more wide open, straighter stems that are coming, or not stems, sorry, exit strokes off of the E. I want to say that these primarily reminded me more of the Lipstick Killer's writing, and we got back into more of these ones that were angular on the left side and angular on the top of the loop of the E, which is definitely consistent with Jack's handwriting. In the D.B. Cooper, we also found this structure once again that we found in Jack's handwriting up here as he formed these letter E's, very consistent with each other. Again, with the missing bottom portion, stopping short. There we go in the Atlanta, Georgia Child Killer. We also have these E's that are unfinished. They almost look like a backwards number 9 to me, I guess, if you will. And that continued all the way down into Bruce Ivans, once again, with that stroke where the exit of the E just ends flat or straight. Let's move into letter F. So in the letter F, again, we have these variations where Jack has a very wide range between the top bar and the crossbar of the F, which is much lower on the actual stem, to the area where the it almost looks like a V sideways on the F because of the angles of the crossbars. Primarily, we have the jetting top crossbar with a shorter middle crossbar, and then we also have this concaved or curved crossbar on the top of the F that occurs in Jack's handwriting. We did this is the only one I found in the capital letters that wasn't constructed with these square crossbars. It had the curved overhang. And then once we started to get into Lipstick Killer, what we found was these very close crossbars with a very long stem. Again, very similar with what we're seeing happening. Ooh, go back. In Jack's handwriting. And as we moved through the Lipstick Killer stuff, we found some that had kind of the curvature on the backside. We have the concaved or curved top crossbar. We also have the jetting long top crossbar in comparison to the very short middle crossbar. So as we hopped over into Elizabeth Short, again, you can cross-reference. These ones are extremely similar to one another. Again, very long stem, very short crossbar in the middle, and the longer crossbar on the top, and even had kind of that same similar attempt at a curved or more rounded top corner of the F that we saw in Lipstick as well. I placed an E over here in the F, and what was my purpose for that? Oh, because we're going to see that type of style in some of the Fs that we were looking at. So when I started to see where the suspect has written the F with the crossbar going to the left of the stem, this one is very minute on this side, but as you get down over here into Tom Voight's, you do see where the cross actually crosses completely through, which wouldn't be typical for the capital letter F to have those crossbars crossing to the left-hand side. But we did see that middle crossbar being crossed to the left-hand side in JonBenet Ramsey. We saw it in the Tim Miller letter right here. We saw it in, let's see, we saw it in the Zodiac right here. And then, of course, that's why I placed the E up here from Elizabeth Short, because, again, we've got that middle crossbar that crosses through the stem. So, oh, there it is in the Channel 9 newsletter as well. So as we carry on through the Sorry Mary letters, we found more of a copybook version of those letter Fs. But as I cross-compare those with more of your copybook Fs from, say, like the Zodiac case and from... let's see, Herb Cain, I declared not a forgery. Again, we've got the long stem, the short bar. Let's see here. Zodiac is where I saw this first. I want to call it the backwards crossed 7 from European handwriting typically has that crossed 7, crossed Z. This is kind of the backward version of it. But when I looked at that particular formation where the capital F actually is a crossbar that jets through the stem, I started to notice that those were actually occurring in more often than not. We see it in the Channel 9 newsletter over here. We saw it in the Oakland County child murder case over here. We saw it in the Atlanta, Georgia. I find it hard to believe that everybody or every single killer's perception who's writing a taunting letter to the police or to the newspapers decided that they were going to cross the stem of their capital Fs with their crossbar. So to me, that's kind of a huge or significant find that suggests that we are dealing with the same type of or same author. So even to the notion that we have that backwards 7, the square version, that's consistent in the Atlanta, Georgia child killer. In the OCCK, we had more of that rounded version that we were talking about, that we were seeing up here in Lipstick and Elizabeth Short, but we still have the crossing of the crossbar through the stem. And that continued on into the Sacramento letter. So the left Fs there were done with a crossbar through the stem as well. In the Christmas card, we had, again, that rounded version that wasn't made in separate strokes. The other 2 Fs that are found here are actually made with separate strokes, where this one appears to have been made with a single stroke. Even had the little uptick that we're going to talk about here at the bottom. That's going to be very prevalent in the lowercase Fs, but that more rounded version that we're seeing there was definitely consistent with the Riverside Phantom, consistent with the Oakland County child murders. With the Fairfield letters, we had more of that rounded left side of the letter F. Again, all of the stars are attributed to a single author based on law enforcement and Department of Justice. So we can clearly take all characteristics from these particular communications and cross-reference that with the rest of the ones in this series. When I got down into Scorpion, again, we started to see the crossbar that crossed completely through on a couple of these Fs. We have more of that rounded version that you saw in the OCCK and in the Riverside Phantom. So it just tells me that that is running in rhythm with the perceived disguise that the suspect has been using. In the JonBenet Ramsey, again, not shocked. We have capital Fs that are actually, the stem is crossed completely through once again. We have the concaved or the curved top of the bars like we saw in Jack's writing. And then we already discussed this particular form that was used in Voinovich and how that fares out with Tom Voigt's and other Fs that are found in this series, including the Sacramento, where that bar crosses to the left of the stem. When I looked at the Anthrax letters, we found more of the long stem. So back and forth, really. We have the one where the crossbar is really close to the bottom of the stem, which is consistent with what we see going on in Jack's Fs up here, to the actual more long stemmed and short crossings of the crossbars, which are considerably similar to other Fs that are found throughout this as you go through. I want to say that I probably did a cross comparison of this one up here Let's see, where did I find in Jack's the crossbars being longer in the middle section? Oh, then the top bar. We did see some of that occurring in Jack's, but not really a lot, just a couple places. Well, right there, we see where the middle crossbar is longer than the top crossbar, and that did occur in at least one of the F's in Anthrax. In getting into the Tim Miller letter, again, we just talked about this. We have the square backward 7 with the crossed bar. So I don't know how many serial killers who are taunting the police idealize this particular style of F as being some type of a disguise, but clearly in several of these letters, that is a huge disguise. And then, of course, in Bruce Ivans, we found that more rounded on the backside and more consistent in the spacing of the crossbars that we saw that was occurring with these more rounded ones that are found in the other letters as we go through. We've got just a few minutes here, and I'm going to try and make it through the lowercase f's. So in Jack's lowercase f's, we found the particular form and shape. We talked about that uptick that happened on the bottom left-hand side. We have a very nice umbrella. And then, of course, we have a very long crossbar that occurs in the F. Now, as I went through, you can find that uptick on many of Jack's F's. So we know that this is a consistent trait that should be found if Jack is the author of these particular letters, that we should find these characteristics accidentally left behind because you could not conceal them at all times. We see that Jack's overhang can go from this very wide umbrella to a more curved umbrella to a very tiny little hook or curve at the top. Another thing that I noted Jack for is what I refer to as the straight stem F, which he does not have an overhang on. So if you saw these independently, you'd think these were T's. These are actually letter F's that are in Jack's handwriting. So going through here, we are going to find where these very tall stem F's with this very close top crossbar is very consistent with other known writings or other known, I'm sorry, not known, but from other crime sprees. So let's take a look at how that crossbar crossing through the F is very consistent with the spacing and the overhang of the Fairfield letters from Zodiac. So it kind of puts it into play. We also see that uptick that's occurring at the bottom of the Fairfield letters that is consistent with Jack's. So going back and forth between these F's, we can see in the Sherry Joe Bates, again, that very wide umbrella with the small uptick off the bottom of the F to the very shallow, thin, and short crossbar that is very consistent with the Lipstick Killer. We have this funky little loop that occurs up here at the top, but we can see that that is also in Jack's arsenal. All the way down to in the Dear Draft Board, I started to find letter F's that had no overhang. So again, it appears as though it's a T. And that T actually occurs in the Zodiac's handwriting. So we have it here. It occurs in, this is the Zodiac's handwriting as well in the Citizen letter. It happened in the Herb Cain letter. So as you just go back and forth, you start to see those consistencies. Now, in the Atlanta, Georgia, while these are capital F's, he did not use lowercase f's. So I went ahead and I placed them in here to see how they fared, because as I got into John Benet Ramsey and found more F's, again, it is a capital letter F that's used in the middle of lowercase printing, and it again has the same style and fashion. Now, the Scorpion letters with these more rounded versions, like we talked about up here in Jack's, where there really isn't more of a hook as it is just kind of an arch rather than having that overhang that we were talking about, is consistent with what we were seeing. Bruce Ivans, again, we had two letter F's, one with the very small hook on the top and one that is posed as a letter T. I don't know how many people out there actually write their F's that look like a T. I certainly don't. You can definitely identify mine as being a letter F. So the consistencies there are still there. We can see in Tom Voight's the upkicks that are coming off. Now, this dragging in stroke of the upper letter is pretty much some of the only differences that I found between Tom Voigt's letters, but we can see that on some occasions that the author did actually drag in pretty close to the bar, as in with the OCCK. But look at these F's here with this uptick on the bottom left side. Again, we have this more of a squarer version, but crossing all the way through as well. So these letter Fs are completely consistent with what we were looking at in the Zodiac's handwriting. Again, there's that uptick, there's that wide overhang, and we see it there as well. I want to say this one is actually from the car door from Lake Berryessa, so we saw the consistencies there. As I go back and forth, again, I'm not disappointed by the comparison of these different styles of F. They do all seem to be fitting within one another. Oh, I just totally spaced out on Kern, the werewolf killer. These are all letter Fs right here. All of them have no overhang. All of them had some type of uptick that was occurring at the bottom, whether it be to the left or to the right. Jack's primarily hang to the left, but obviously it's almost as if they were attempting to make some type of a cursive F with this little wraparound that happens at the bottom, but it's missing overhangs on the top altogether. And we do see that that is definitely within the arsenal of these other communications. Well, that's about all we have for today. We will get back to the letter G starting next week. I hope everybody has a wonderful weekend. Take care, and we'll see you soon.
Oh,